Hi everyone. Thanks to all of those of you joining. We've got some people just coming in, so just bear with us. We'll get started in a moment. Okay, I think we can get started here. Thank you to all of you joining us here today, and welcome to our webinar on Understanding Textile Exchange's Cashmere LCA study. We'll just do a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to the impact measurement team to kick things off. So before we start, remind you of our antitrust statement, which is that Textile Exchange convenes the textile community and values diversity of views, expertise, opinions, backgrounds, and experiences. It's expected that members of this community will collaborate by sharing ideas, information, and resources of publicly available information only, and avoid discussions on price, strategic plans, or other private and sensitive information. And also, as with so many of our sessions, we're operating today under the Chatham House rule. So you're welcome to use any of the information received today, but please do not reveal the identity or affiliation of anyone else here. And we have quite a full agenda today, so I will walk you through briefly what to expect. We'll start with an overview of Textile Exchange's position on LCA before moving into the key deliverables and findings. From there, we'll walk through the summary results. We'll then introduce the LCA Plus assessment and what it adds beyond traditional approaches. We'll also cover the timeline, available resources, and what comes next following the release of this LCA. Finally, we have set aside time for questions at the end of the session. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box at any point, and we'll address them during that Q&A segment. And our speakers here. So I'm Anna Heaton. I'm the Animal Materials Lead at Textile Exchange, but I'm joined today by a panel of my Textile Exchange colleagues, our Chief Impact Officer, Beth Jensen, our Human Rights and Social Responsibility Lead, Siobhan Cullen, and Francesca Sartor, our Impact Data Manager. And also we have an external speaker. This is Emma Longworth, Lead Consultant at Integrity Ag. And with that, I'll hand over to Beth to get us started. Over to you, Beth.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, everybody. For those of you who may have attended some of our previous life cycle assessment webinars, this will be repeat information, but we always want to ground all of our LCA studies in appropriate use of life cycle assessment data. And so the first thing to reorient everyone to is our ensuring integrity in the use of life cycle assessment data paper that we published I guess a couple of years ago now, that really lays out kind of how we think about use of LCA data, appropriate use of LCA data, and recommendations for what to do and what not to do. So if you have not yet reviewed that report, we highly encourage doing so before you start to dig into any of the other details related to any of the life cycle assessment studies or data that Textile Exchange has been publishing. So next slide, Francesca. Yeah, and so just a few of the key highlights from that paper. Really, we believe that life cycle assessment data should only be used when there's a very clear understanding of how it's been developed. So what are the underlying assumptions, methodologies, what's the intended use of the specific life cycle assessment data, that everyone should avoid comparing life cycle assessment data on a number of different fronts, comparing it between different fiber or material categories, or between separate LCA studies, or even within a study. Excuse me. And also to avoid comparing life cycle assessment data between different industry databases, because different assumptions and different sort of guardrails, if you will, have been put into place around the different life cycle assessment databases that are in use by the industry. So this is really important to remember. Life cycle assessment studies in general can use different assumptions, different approaches, and should not be considered comparable, unless unless they're specifically developed to be such. And so that's a really important point to keep in mind. And then finally, Textile Exchange, at Textile Exchange, we always encourage what we call an LCA plus approach. So looking at impact categories beyond what's covered in traditional life cycle assessment methodology. And you'll hear more about how we've applied that approach to our Cashmere LCA a bit later in this webinar. So next slide, just a few more points around kind of the intended use of life cycle assessment data in general. So I won't read through this point by point. You can see this here, but certainly we encourage the use of life cycle assessment data for things like supporting brands in their Scope 3 reporting, supporting scenario modeling and strategy development, informing future improvement and areas of opportunity for action for improvement upon the impacts in a specific material category or production system. The data should not be used for things like public-facing claims or marketing claims or any form of comparison, specifically based on an LCA study that is not conducted specifically on your supply chain. So this data that we're sharing today and that will be shared in the databases can be used as sort of proxy data, again, for scenario modeling, Scope 3 reporting, et cetera. But specific claims, product claims, public-facing claims, related to impact should be avoided. Again, unless a life cycle assessment study is conducted specifically on your supply chain. And then also just decision making, production or specific sourcing decisions based solely on LCA results, we also discourage. LCA is one good tool in the toolbox, but it should not be the only tool that's used. And so we encourage, a well-rounded view of kind of different ways of looking at impact in addition to life cycle assessment studies. Okay, and then the last slide that I have is just a reminder of the different life cycle assessment studies that Textile Exchange has been working on. We've been really pleased to launch the cotton LCA study and the polyester LCA study earlier this year. This Cashmere study is the next on the list, which we're very excited about. And then we've been working on some others as well, and including responsible wool standard wool and responsible mohair standard mohair. So more to come on the rest of these in the coming months. With that, I think I will turn over to Francesca.
Thank you, Beth. So today we are really pleased to announce that the results of our Kashmir LCA study, along with all the related resources, are publicly available on our website. So all LCA study deliverables will be fully aligned with our position as outlined in the paper, Integrity and Use of LCA, as presented by Beth in previous slides. So specifically for the Kashmir LCA, to ensure that the industry can easily assess and use all the results, we provide a range of supporting resources, including the technical LCA report, so a full LCA ISO compliant, including all the detailed such as scope, boundaries, assumptions, modeling approach, results and limitations. Then we have a summary report, which is a shorter version of the full LCA that presents the key findings and results in a less technical way. We also have LCA FAQs to provide responses to key questions about the LCA study and to help improve the interpretation and understanding of the findings and results. We also have a social assessment released as a separate document and is intended to examine the human rights impacts associated with the cashmere production. And finally, in terms of deliverables, all the data set will also be submitted to various industry databases, such as EcoInvent, Sphera, WorldDB, and EGMSI. So we'll deep dive into the results in a second with our consultants, but let's just take a moment to reflect on which are the key findings from the study. So this is the first comprehensive and widely accessible LCA study of cashmere production to assess multiple environmental impact categories across two major cashmere producing countries and also two production systems, nomadic grazing and farmed system. Then, as you can see in the second box here on the slide, in terms of results, differences in herd level productivity and management practices are the main drivers of environmental impact. So more than just the type of production system itself. Because of the non-comparative nature of this LCA study, variation in results across regions and differences in data quality, no generic statements of comparative assertions can be made. Then the environmental results were complemented, as mentioned in my previous slide, by a social assessment that explored the cultural value of cashmere production, particularly in the context of nomadic grazing. So framing the findings within the broader context reinforces the message that impact reduction activities go beyond environmental considerations alone and must take into account the complexity of traditional practices. On the final box, we also highlighted some future research. We should aim to refine land use impact models, expand regional data collection, and investigate interventions that improve environmental outcomes and social and economic well-being. Further research is also needed to expand and test the outcomes of this study and also to support sustainable transformation in the cashmere industry. We also wanted to take a moment today to reflect on some of the key learnings that we got from this LCA study, but also more broadly from our LCA work as Textile Exchange. So here we have a few points on the slide, so I'll go just through them. So what we learned from this project is that data collection is never one size fits all. So it requires the right support, capacity, and must be adapted to different production systems. We also faced recurring challenges, such as obtaining representative data for certain region or certain data points. Then strong relationships with stakeholders are essential, so specifically when working with Tier 4 actors. The value proposition of the project needs to be clear and relevant to them from the start. And for this specific study, we also had an in-person workshop with Kashmir experts that was held in Mongolia to review with them the assumptions and initial findings. Taking an holistic approach is critical, so LCA results should consider the broader context of the production system, but at the same time, we saw that LCA plus impact data viability is still quite limited. So another key point is that these projects are both time and resource intensive, so with data collection and critical review being the most demanding phases. We also learned that collective action is powerful, so collaborative LCA created shared value and help move the industry forward. Finally, communication matters. So timely, transparent engagement with the project group, especially through in-person meetings, made a real difference. And importantly, results must always be presented carefully, ensuring they are neutral and do not appear to favor or disadvantage any specific production system or region. These are quite a lot of learnings, so I'm now going to hand over to Integrity Ag and specifically to Emma to guide us through the summary results. So thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Francesca. Hi, everybody. My name is Emma Longworth. I work at Integrity Ag. We're based in Australia, and we have been leading these animal fibre LCAs across cashmere, mohair, wool and hides, and it's very exciting milestone to see this cashmere LCA published. So I'll jump right into it now. Thanks, Francesca. So the data collection phase, we collected primary data from over 170 herders and farmers across Mongolia and China. And this is quite a significant effort for an LCA. This is a very large sample size, and that's not to go unnoticed. Although there are many herders and farmers across Mongolia and China, this is still a substantial effort for an LCA, and that should definitely be recognised and considered here. So our stratification approach, we aimed to collect data across the 3 key ecological zones in Mongolia, so the forest steppe in the north, the steppe in the middle, and the desert in the south. So we did cover those 3 key ecological zones. And in Mongolia, in China, we collected data from Inner Mongolia and Shanxi. So these covered the 2 main production systems, which was nomadic grazing, so extensive pastoral systems, and the more intensive farm systems that were observed. Next slide. I'll just touch a bit more on the data collection as well. So we also collected data from 11 primary processing facilities in Mongolia and 7 primary processing facilities in China. So the study does cover the production of cashmere at the primary production stage. So what I mean by that is before the raw fibre enters the primary processing facility, and then we also include all the impacts during primary processing. So primary processing includes the scouring, so the washing of cashmere, and the dehairing stage. So the impacts in this report are reported for those 2 stages, per kilo of raw cashmere at the farm, primary production stage, and also per kilo of clean dehaired cashmere at the end of the primary processing facility. The study includes all 16 impact categories that are assessed in PEF, and the other impact categories in the HIG-MSI. So after we collected all the data was reviewed by experts in Mongolia and China, and then we completed our modelling phase. We then completed the report, and it's gone through an extensive review process. This was with 4 critical reviewers, largely with a background in livestock science, LCA, and consulting in environment and land. So that was a very thorough review, and we're very grateful for those 4 professionals, and we were able to present that final technical LCA report there that's been published. Next slide, please. Yeah, so now I'll jump straight into the results. There's a lot to uncover in this report, so I will just focus on the key findings. So I touched on that the system boundary covered both the primary production and the primary processing stage of cashmere. So all inputs and outputs into these stages of the life cycle. So there's some key inputs that we observed at the primary production stage. Obviously, you have Mongolia itself. It's a very low input, extensive grazing system. So compared to many farming systems around the world, it's a very low input, so minimal fuel use, minimal supplementary feed, no fertilizer, no chemicals. They do have some veterinary products that they do use, but otherwise it's very low. In comparison, the farm systems were a little bit more intensive, so they did have a higher amount of supplementary feed that was used, a little bit of cropping to supplement feed as well. And then in the primary processing facilities, inputs would include water, energy use, and some amount of chemicals for washing as well. Next slide. So the report, it captures the 16 impact categories, but the impact category that most brands and consumers are interested in is the carbon footprint. We want to highlight that it's good to not have the carbon tunnel vision. So if you're looking at these results, please do consider the broader system, and that these agricultural systems are very complex. They have many more constraints and variability than other industries or factories with very defined inputs and outputs. So many unique challenges that other industries don't face. So when we're looking at these results and making decisions, that's also very important to consider. So we report results for both the nomadic and farm systems. Here the results are reported for the carbon footprint, and the key finding from the study was that the carbon footprint results were not significantly different between the two studies, between the two systems. Another key finding is that the farm stage, or the primary production stage, is the key contributor to the carbon footprint. So as you can see here, the grey bar is contributing almost 80 to 90% of impacts for the carbon footprint for both systems. And then we have a small amount of impacts coming from the primary processing facilities. Next slide. Thank you. So the key greenhouse gas emissions that are contributing to the climate change indicator is methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. And what we see in these systems is that the major greenhouse gas emission is methane, and that's largely driven by the ruminant digestive system of the goats. They erupt methane as a byproduct of their digestion. So that's the dominant gas contributing to the carbon footprint. So allocation is a key point of discussion that came up in the critical review, and this was something that we spent quite some time looking into. What I mean by allocation is how we divide impacts between the various co-products that are produced from this system. So a cashmere production system not only produces cashmere as the primary output, but many herders also produced milk as an alternative product, as well as the sale of animals for meat. So when we are doing an LCA, we have to allocate the emissions from the whole system to these three products. And this can be done several ways. Then the most, the agreed way in the scientific literature and guidelines for small ruminant production systems is a biophysical allocation based on protein. So that's what the headline results reflect. We did investigate other allocation alternatives, including an economic allocation, so which divides the impacts based on the value of the product. and then various different applications of the energy requirement. So the energy required to produce cashmere versus the energy required to produce milk or meat. So those results are presented in the report as a sensitivity analysis, with the key results being on the protein allocation method, consistent with the scientific literature. Thank you. So we also did a sensitivity analysis on soil carbon. So when we are completing a carbon footprint, we not only look at the impacts from the system itself, but also how impacts from land use and land use change. So in this study, there was no material impacts from land use change. And what I mean by that is the conversion of, say, forest land to grassland or grassland to cropland, those types of activities. So that was not observed in these production systems. However, when we assessed impacts from land use, so the impacts of using this land, so the impacts of the animals grazing this system, this was incredibly difficult to assess, largely because it's very difficult to measure. So we did exclude the soil carbon results from the headline, and largely because it's hard to differentiate the impacts of soil carbon change from climate change versus the impacts from the livestock itself. So most of the literature to date shows that soil carbon change in rangeland systems is largely driven by rainfall. So it's very difficult to isolate the contribution from grazing. However, we did look into this in a sensitivity analysis with soil carbon loss and gain, so sequestration rates that have been observed in the literature. And if this was included, it would be quite material on the carbon footprint. The key limitations is soil carbon is incredibly difficult to measure. The most valid or operational approach is to take soil samples and measure that over the change over quite a long time period. And we didn't have that availability or time and money to do that in this study. Modelling techniques do have a large amount of uncertainty. So what this is saying is this is potentially an area of significance, but we need more research and higher resolution data to be able to really understand what's happening. So the key findings from this study, Francesca did touch on this before, but the main key takeaway is there's no significant difference in climate change impacts between the two production systems. There are some trade-offs with the other impact categories. So the farm system did have higher energy use and higher water use, and that is reflected in the results. But the impacts from land use were higher in the nomadic grazing system. There are some challenges with the current assessment methods used behind these LCA tools, and that needs to be considered as well when interpreting the results. We have quite a detailed discussion on this in the report. That's worth reading, particularly when interpreting those land use results. So the other key takeaway is that productivity is the greatest lever in these systems. They have a tremendous amount of gain to be made in both production systems. The two main factors that drive this lower productivity is climate and nutrition. So if these systems were able to improve their winter management and livestock nutrition during these really harsh cold winters and summer droughts, this would dramatically improve mortality rates, reproductive rates, and livestock performance in these systems. And second, the stocking rates. The herds often exceeded the carrying capacity of their rangelands and produced less output per area, whilst simultaneously increasing that land degradation pressure. So the practical implication on these LCA findings is that even modest improvements in mortality rates, cashmere yield, reproductive performance by managing that nutrition and animal feed will be critical to improving both the livelihoods of these herders and farmers in these production systems, but also the environmental impact. So the implications of these results, so they should not be used as a direct comparison with other fibres and between Mongolia and China. The results are not intended to be representative of Mongolia and China. They are reported per production system for that reason. They should not be used to be made procurement decisions. And as I mentioned before, these systems are incredibly complex. There's so many limitations and constraints that are so far different from other industries. They have climate, nutrition, disease, genetics, social and cultural factors that shape their management decisions. Interventions to improve productivity and reduce emissions matter far more than the choice of allocation. So please don't get caught up too much in the allocation debate. If we focus on what's next and making those emission reduction efforts, that matters far more than whether we choose protein, economic or energy allocation. Brands should not withdraw from one system in favour of the other. There are improvements that can be made in both, and that's incredibly valuable to gain. So even modest productivity gains could significantly reduce environmental impacts in both systems, and market access and economic incentives for herders are key enablers of practice change. Thank you very much for your time, and please reach out if you have any questions. I'll hand this now over to Siobhan.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks so much. So now we're going to briefly cover the social assessment, which, as we said, was the plus part of the LCA. So before diving into the findings, I'll briefly cover the scope, methodology and limitations of the social assessment because it's slightly different to the full environmental assessment. So the objective was not to produce a comprehensive study of all cashmere production in Mongolia and China, but rather to develop an evidence-based understanding of key social, livelihood and human rights factors affecting the cashmere producing communities, because we know they're so vital to these livelihoods, and then identify some areas which may warrant further attention and research. So the scope, similarly to the LCA, the environmental LCA, was focused on the primary production stages of cashmere in Mongolia, but importantly, we didn't cover the primary processing stages of production. We looked at social, livelihood and human rights dimensions associated with the goat herding and farm level production systems, including nomadic and farm systems. And we also did not look at the textile manufacturing, retail or end of life stages in this study. The methodology followed a similar process to the environmental side. We combined multiple research methods, so we conducted extensive literature review alongside the primary data collection from those 170 same herders and farmers across Mongolia and China. And then the study findings were reviewed alongside 5 social expert consultations, and they covered social, livelihood, pastoralist, and Kashmir sector expertise. The findings were then triangulated across all the sources to strengthen the confidence in the results that we found. But there are, of course, limitations with any social assessment. Though the sample size was large for an LCA, we were constrained by time, cost, and logistics, and it means that the results shouldn't be considered representative of all Kashmir producers in either country. The survey data was self-reported, and the expert consultation, which we had, though very valuable, was weighted more heavily towards Mongolian expertise than Chinese expertise, though both were included. And then the findings are therefore intended to provide an overview of the key issues and trends rather than a basis for comparing Mongolia and China. And there are some shared challenges. So across both countries, producers face a common set of pressures. Climate change is increasing drought, extreme weather, pasture degradation, as we know, and water scarcity. And at the same time, many of the herders remain financially vulnerable due to the fluctuating cashmere prices they're experiencing and limited influence over the pricing decisions due to the number of actors in the supply chain. And then there's a widespread reliance on loans as well. We also heard concerns about the younger generations moving away from herding and raising questions about the long-term future of the sector. But on the positive side, there are emerging opportunities that were identified. The certification, traceability, and sustainability initiatives working on the ground are expanding and helping the producers access premium markets. New quality-based pricing approaches are beginning to reward better fiber quality and stewardship practices rather than simply a production volume. And cooperatives, pasture user groups, training programs, and technology are also helping some of the producers improve productivity, market access, and resilience. So overall, the assessment found that cashmere production remains far more than just an economic activity for these producers. It's closely linked to their livelihoods, cultural identity, and community cohesion across both countries. And there's a lot more detail that can be found in the assessment paper itself, so please take a look if you are interested. Ensuring the long-term sustainability of the sector is going to require addressing the financial vulnerability that producers are facing, climate resilience, land access, and generational renewal, while ensuring that the initiatives that are operating remain inclusive and accessible. Again, take a good look at the assessment and let us know any questions if you have them. And with that, I'll hand back to Francesca to talk you through the project timelines and next steps.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Siobhan. Now, just to conclude, we'll take a look to the overall timeline of the project. So, in addition to the learning that we've just shared, like at the beginning of the presentation, we thought that it was quite interesting to have a look to this timeline to give you like a bit of a sense of the overall time that we invested into this project. So we began this project in 2022 with data collection and critical review proving to be the most time-intensive phases, as you can see here on the slide. And now, after more than 3 years of dedicated work, the final results were released last week, so July 2026. And then focusing on the final months of the project, so at the beginning of 2026, the critical review panel completed their assessments, and our communication team began the review. A final word just on next steps. So we publicly launched the results last week, as I said, and we are today hosting the external Kashmir LCA webinar. And now we expect all data sets to be available on databases listed on the slide by end of 2026, depending on the different releases. Now, just a word on what are the next steps following the Kashmir LCA release. So this LCA study is the first, as we have just said a couple of times now, but is the first comprehensive and widely accessible LCA study of Kashmir production, and it goes some way to filling the gap which was missing for the industry. But there are still some methodological limitations, as also Emma mentioned earlier, particularly when assessing extensive pastoralist production systems. So Textile Exchange now, together with a group of brands and other organizations, is working on a project to address the limitation of current LCA methodologies in assessing particularly extensive pastorally production systems. One of the aims of this project is to enable a more accurate assessment of animal fibers more broadly, so their contribution to various impact areas beyond only GHG emissions. So if you're interested to know more about this project, get in contact with our team. We have added the email address here on the slide, so feel free to reach out and ask any questions you might have. Finally, to conclude, we wanted to take a moment to also acknowledge the contribution of the many individuals and organizations who made this LCA study of Kashmir possible, as their commitment is really the foundation of all this work. With this, our presentation comes to an end, and we have some time now for Q&A. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Francesca. You say, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put these into the Q&A box. So I have one question here, which we can go to, which was, what surprised you most over as you were preparing and conducting the LCA, as well as the results you found? So I suppose, what did we find that we might not have expected to find, or what did we think we were going to find that perhaps we didn't? I'm not sure who wants to take that.
I think we probably all have a different answer to that one. I'll just say from my perspective, and maybe it wasn't a surprise, but it was just a deeper understanding, perhaps, of the challenges associated with data collection. There's a reason that we haven't had a more broadly accessible LCA study on Cashmere or updated LCAs on a lot of other production systems in the past. It's extremely challenging to get data on the ground, and even in working directly with the folks on the ground, then we encountered some other challenges as well. Just all sorts of aspects can come into play when you're trying to collect that data. So it's really a Herculean feat that we were able to get the quality of data set that we were, I would say, here. But it just really provided some very interesting learnings and just realities of what it means to collect good data to go into an LCA study like this. But Francesca or Emma, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
I have to say the data collection was very challenging, but also quite rewarding to just refine the way we ask questions and the way we collect data. So many learnings to take away from that. I guess in terms of surprising results, I guess, we didn't observe such a stark contrast between the two production systems. They both have their similarities and differences. So that was a key takeaway there. Though you do have those trade-offs when looking at the other impact categories assessed outside of climate change.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Emma. That's helpful context there. There's one very nice one here. Thank you very much. That says, "How do you feel to have released the first publicly available Cashmere LCA? Great work, all." Francesca, do you want to take that? I think we're all very happy about it.
Well,
But I
this is
don't know.
coming from Eleni, who played a large part in the getting this study up and running and for several of the years as well. So, congrats to you too, Eleni.
Yeah,
But yes,
good.
Francesca, please.
I would say excited. Thank you, Lenny, for the question. Because I think that is like it was really a learning curve, this project for all of us. We learned a lot from all the stakeholders that were involved throughout the project. And it was also so good to see like all the different data collection partners as well as the brands all coming together with shared goals to understand really deeply like the impacts uh, of this like raw material and also like learning how where all the differences, the intrinsic differences come from and understand how those differences affect the results. That was really like interesting. So yeah, more to come, I would say, also with the new project to better understand that.
Thanks, Francesca. And yes, thanks, Eleni, for your contribution to this as well. This is a great one, actually. Sorry, Francesca. This sort of follows on from what you were talking about with the addendum, the pastoralist system addendum that we're now sort of working on as the future work. It says, "What aspects of pastoralism do you think LCA methodologies currently struggle to represent, and how do we hope that the addendum will address those gaps?"
Yeah, I can start commenting a bit on that. So I would say that what aspects is identifying what aspects is really like the aim of this project. So it's hard to tell now because really we want to start really from listing out which are the potential positive and negative aspects that we couldn't fully capture through our LCA because of time, but also because of limitation of the methodology itself. So starting by setting the basis, so understanding what we are missing here will really be the first step of this project. And then once that we get that potentially long list, we'll start understanding how to capture that in terms of accounting. So really translating what we find out in terms of gaps in something that is accountable for. And then on the second part of the question, how do you hope that then will address these gaps? So we really, again, we'll start from a literature review, so really understanding what is already available in the industry, because there are some studies that have been developed in the past years, as well as other like research that we want to leverage, because we don't want to like duplicate efforts, given the time that is needed to fully understand all these complicated aspects. So we'll start from a literature review, and then once that we have that, work with some like industry experts to fill in the gaps, to comment what is missing, and so on. And as we keep saying within our project group, making sure that we are asking the right questions so that we are tackle the right topics and not just focus on GHG, but also focus like having like a broader view, including like further aspects such as a line, to our LCA plus approach. So making sure that we also capture further like impact areas. So yeah, more to come on that, I would say.
Thanks, Francesca. That's great. Really helpful and as you say, more to come, but exciting as well that we've got this in mind too. Emma, I don't know if you'd be able to take a question about land use and land use change and how that was thought about. The question was, why was land use and land use change not included for the carbon footprint? But I know you spoke to a bit of this in the presentation, but perhaps you could.
Yeah, not a problem. Sorry, I probably can be a little bit more clear. So we did assess land use and land use change, and we reported it separately. So that's the, I guess, key thing there. It is being assessed. We didn't just ignore it. So the land use change component. So, say forest land to grassland conversion was reported separately. It was not, we didn't zero it out. So the study does quantify this, and it's a very small number and it's not material. And that is presented separately in the report. In regards to land use, so soil carbon from grassland, remaining grassland, so the goats grazing the land. This is the bigger issue. So there, it's very difficult to measure, and the attribution is not possible with the available evidence. So most of the research indicates that rainfall and temperature variability account for more than 90% of soil organic carbon variation in rangeland systems, independent of grazing pressure or herd size. So the study couldn't separate what proportion of observed soil carbon loss is caused by cashmere production versus long-term climate change. So these drivers are also interrelated. Reduced rainfall weakens pasture growth, which intensifies the grazing pressure per unit of forage. And the soil carbon models that are available aren't really validated. We haven't got the data available to validate these at this scale. So existing models are very sensitive to assumptions, and this hasn't been adequately tested at this in these contexts. And spatial and temporal measurement constraints are a key one there. So soil carbon is highly variable at small spatial scales, and changes are very slow. So the data available at the moment doesn't provide the site-specific resolution needed to make a defensible per product attribution. I hope that provides a bit more context, and yeah.
Maybe.
Thanks, Emma. No, I think that's helpful just to add to what already presented. Sorry, Francesca, were you going to add something there as well?
Yeah, just briefly, just wanted to say that, as Emma said, all the context needed to properly interpret the results is provided in our report, but particularly for brands or other organizations that are aiming to use the data directly from databases. So how results will be presented there might differ from how they are presented in our report. So we are now in conversation with the different databases to understand how land use and land use change will be integrated in the results of the different databases, just for you to know that to read properly the description of each data sets in the database, so you understand fully how these impact have been integrated, so that you can properly use the data there as well.
Thanks, Francesca. That's all very helpful from you and Emma. There's another question here about, are there any plans to expand the LCA to different stages of the cashmere supply chain beyond the raw material phase, so mill level, factory level, etc.? And also, thank you very much for saying great work to the team. I agree, great work from the team. But yes, anybody, Francesca as well, perhaps this is one for you about.
Yeah, thank you for the question, because we are asked this one many times. So as all our LCA studies are focused on tier 4 level, because this is also our aim, our focus as an organization. So the plan for now is not to expand this analysis further, for consistency with the other LCA study, but also in terms of priorities as an organization. That's not the plan for the moment, but yeah, in case if anything raised, we will we'll inform the industry about this plan.
Right, thank you. And a question here about I suppose the question is specifically, do you expect industry's general uptake of cashmere to be affected by the LCA? I think this is probably yes. What is the impact of the LCA? What do we see as sort of what brands could do following this LCA? That might be a slightly different framing. But, Beth, can I hand that one to you?
Yeah. I mean, I would reframe this to say that what our hope is that the industry is using this life cycle assessment study to understand, how areas for improvement within their existing supply chains. So that's always the hope with all of our life cycle assessment studies. Again, as mentioned in the kind of opening section of the webinar and in our integrity and use of LCA kind of recommendations and paper, LCA is one really good data point to make sourcing decisions, but it should not be the only data point used to make sourcing decisions. Um, and really, because you really shouldn't be comparing, across different studies or across different material categories or anything like that, production systems. Um, you know, uh, that would really discourage the use of this in that way where where we you would be drawing conclusions of some kind based solely on LCA data. Instead, we really hope it highlights the areas where we can work collectively, across the supply chain, between producers and brands and everyone in between, to address some of the impact related areas. As Emma mentioned, between the two production systems that we looked at, there are trade-offs in terms of the different impact areas. And so that's a really great finding and something that we can dig into as an industry and create some collective action around some of those areas to continue the improvement and working again collaboratively across the supply chain to make those improvements. So I would rephrase that to say, yes, let's use it as identifying areas of opportunity.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. I think that's sort of draws us nicely to a close, actually, as a good sort of ending point for this to think of the opportunities that can come from having this data, which, as has been stressed, is so important, that all this work's gone in, that we now have this information that we didn't have before. So I hope everybody has a chance to do the deep dive both into the full LCA report and also the LCA plus social report as well that Siobhan Cullen spoke about. But thank you all very much for joining this webinar. And yes, we'll see you on another one another time. Thank you.
Thank you.